Hi Aline, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm very good. So I've heard a lot about نتكلم. Can you please tell us a bit what is نتكلم?
Sure. So Natakellam is a social enterprise whose goal is to provide an income to refugees and displaced people, regardless of their location and work status. And we do that by leveraging their language skills and the freelance economy and connecting them to tutoring and translation jobs.
Okay, that's cool and it's very needed. How did you come up with the idea?
So I came up with the idea as a result of my terrible Arabic skills. So I'm Lebanese, born and raised in New York, Francophone household. So Arabic took the back seat growing up, and I always would work on Arabic. I knew a little bit of Arabic when I'd go back to Lebanon, visit my grandparents, my cousins. I would take Arabic at USG, AUB, but I never really mastered it, as we could say. And when I was in Beirut, so I moved to Lebanon and I worked as a journalist for several years. When I was working as a journalist, I realized that so many people were coming from abroad and they learned modern standard Arabic, which is the language that unites all 22 Arab League states, but they didn't speak the local dialect, so what you'd actually need to speak to communicate with the people. So if you're a journalist and you're working in an Arabic-speaking country, you do want to learn the local dialect. Or if you're an aid worker, or if you're, working in all types of work related to humanitarianism. If you want to support people like refugees, for example, you need to speak their dialect. So I was realizing there was a need for that access to practicing with native speakers their local dialect. And at the same time, I was in Lebanon during the Arab uprisings, the Syrian conflict that turned into, the largest refugee crisis of our time, of our century. And so I was seeing also all these Syrians just like you and me, normal people.
Yeah.
They're not, a foreign, type of entity or stranger. People who had their lives ahead of them, highly skilled, highly educated, flowing into Lebanon, and in Lebanon or in Jordan, Turkey, all of those neighboring countries to Syria, because those are countries that have had their set of struggles, either former conflict or significant unemployment rates for the youth, they don't give refugees a work permit. So I understand why governments are doing that, but then you find yourself in you're completely stuck. Because if you have these millions of people who are coming in, they don't have the opportunity to work. They aren't getting resettled to Europe because also only 1% of refugees in the world get resettled. What do you do in such a situation? So I was just imagining how hard it must be to be, if I were Syrian today, I would find myself in that situation. Yeah. And if you study, I've studied philosophy in the past, and there's all these theories that you are your work, and how hard it is to not be able to work and not even have a legal right to work. And I just told myself, it's such a dead-end situation. What can we do to help both Lebanon and Syria? Because Lebanon is struggling, absorbing all these refugees as well. And then I told myself, I had always wanted to go to Damascus to work on my Arabic, because in Beirut you speak English, French, and Arabic. And I told myself, what if the Syrians that I'm seeing that are really highly skilled, they could become language tutors, and they could help all the people who are studying Arabic and want to work on the dialect, they could become their language partner. So this is where the idea came from. I also had worked as a tutor in the past, and I believe that there's an incredible friendship that's developed in a one-on-one tutoring setting. And what we need most today is understanding and exchange and friendship building and conversation. So one thing led to the next. I was like, this could be a startup maybe. I kind of laughed. I've never had any ambitions of building a startup, to be completely honest. That wasn't the line of work I was going for. But I pitched the idea, and one thing led to another. We were in a competition and we piloted the project. And our pilot got picked up in social media, actually. We actually launched and created a very simple pilot in 2015, right when the little Syrian boy was washed up on the shores of Turkey. So I don't know if you remember that moment, but there was an awakening to the refugee crisis. The whole world realized what was going on in Syria. And so it was literally the same week that we launched our platform, and 5,000 shares of Natakallam, and we had like 300 people sign up to take Arabic, and that's how we came to life actually.
What are the challenges that you faced as an entrepreneur while you were starting your company?
So I think when you're an entrepreneur, you're doing everything. You're doing HR, you're doing budgeting and finances, marketing, communications. So that's definitely a challenge. You're wearing all the hats, and you might not have ever worn those hats before or have any sets of skills in those hats. So that's definitely a challenge. It's also, when your startup is actually successful and people are interested in it, it's also hard to know when you should say yes and when you should say no to opportunities, and be very strategic in your decision making. As social entrepreneurs, when you're working on such a heavy topic as refugees and their livelihoods, it's also very hard because you're torn between your heart and your business, right? How do you create an equilibrium between being human enough and being caring enough, but also being caring with a limit, because there's just a limit to what you can do. So that was definitely a challenge. It's an ongoing challenge. And you're running a business, so really starting to understand the business world and how things work was something for me that was challenging. I don't have an MBA, I don't have a business background. So I would say those are definitely a few of the big challenges.
Do you think that being a woman has helped you in your leadership position?
I think that today there is a big push to support women entrepreneurs, and I would say I've benefited from that. So I've had the chance of being in competitions and being in accelerator programs that are really trying to encourage women to take leadership positions, look for investors, etc. So in my situation, I don't think I could say that being a woman has actually hurt me. I've actually been lucky enough to be at a time where, on the contrary, if you're a woman and you're leading a business that's having some traction, it's a great moment to be in this. People are supporting, people are getting on board. My company has not gone for investors yet either. So I do believe that that's probably a different experience, because we're so humanitarian that we've gone for competition money, grant money, foundation money. And as a result, I haven't dealt with the stress of being in front of a very kind of maybe traditional investor mindset. I do know, and I can imagine that it would be different being a woman in that position and being a man in that position.
What about the refugees that are working with you in the company? How much is the percentage of women versus men?
So we're about, I think we're around 55-45. It's a bit more men. The reason for that is that actually a lot of the men have left Syria because they were going to be drafted and have to join the either Assad's army or potentially extremist groups. So we've seen a lot of these men, and those, because they're traditionally the ones who are looking for the income, because in the traditional Arab mindset, the man is responsible for bringing in the income. So they would find the takallam, they'd apply, and we are, we of course support women's equality, but we don't want to have a simple approach to just supporting women and not supporting men.
Of course.
It's very important to also be conscious of the dynamic of the culture in which you're working. So, I've heard stories about refugee camps where an NGO goes in and only helps the women, and then that creates problems between the man and the woman. So we really, we stand very strongly to support women's rights and women's issues, but we want to do it with a conscious mind and understanding of the nuances. But what we've seen is also really wonderful. We have the women who work for us, and they are mothers, and they can work from the comfort of their home. Some of them have their babies on their laps. We've had many of our tutors have children, like they were pregnant, they had their baby. Some of their students are sending gifts from the US to Lebanon, all that stuff. So of course we have many women working for us, and I think it's an especially wonderful opportunity to be able to work from home as a woman when you have a baby or when you're not used to going out. But we give opportunities also we're not just women focused. We also understand why it's important to support Syrian men.
It is important to support all genders and every person, no matter
Exactly.
what their
Yes.
background.
Yeah.
Of course. Did you have an incident that really affected you with the refugees? For example, a story that you'd like to share with us?
I think the past 3 years have really made me realize how at every level of their existence, being a refugee makes things impossible or 10 times harder to accomplish. So, for example, we have one of the Syrians who worked with us. He was resettled to Italy, and he told me, like, if you're a Syrian refugee and you're trying to rent a house, you're gonna probably get rejected 20 times. If you're a normal person, you might get rejected 5 times, but you're a Syrian refugee, that's it. It's the label. He actually, he wrote a letter of recommendation for me for one of the applications I was writing, and he said that the word refugee and the label Syrian refugee is what destroyed him more than the situation. That label made everything he did impossible. And and in fact, working on Metakalem has made me extremely careful with the word refugee because it's such a dangerous word today. Unfortunately, if you look at the history, the word refugee, maybe like in the 1970s in Iran, like being a political refugee was heroic. Right? You stood up for your beliefs, now you're persecuted by your government. However, today, being a refugee is associated with being a burden, being violent, being a terrorist. And so, that's definitely something that has, I'm very careful with the word refugee. In fact, when we have sessions with the tutors, the refugees who work as language tutors, we spent an hour discussing the word refugee because Natakalem uses it. And we're very careful, and we want to make sure that our language tutors are comfortable with that word and understand why we use it. So.
I'd like to ask you if you'd be interested in mentoring one of the girls or women that will be inspired by while watching your interview.
Yeah, sure. I will say yes with caution because one of the challenges of being a social entrepreneur is your personal well-being and your time management, which I have been pretty bad at. So I would be happy to try and see how I can support within probably a very structured and limited.
So depending on your time,
yes,
on your
exactly.
availability.
Mm-hmm.
So before we finish our interview, I would like you to give one advice to all the girls that are listening to you right now, that are sitting home on their social media.
Well, I personally think that we're living in a very crazy world, and we can all contribute a bit to it. And I would encourage people to go beyond their personal needs and see what they can do to contribute to changing the current status quo of our planet. I think we're all responsible for giving back and especially those who've had a comfortable life and have been lucky. I think we're the best place to be able to give back. So I would encourage anyone who has an idea that whether for a business or for something social, I do think it's worth pursuing. My other recommendation would be also to really discover what it is that existent already, and I believe in the power of collaboration. I believe that we need more partnerships and collaboration across different sectors, people should complement each other, not compete with each other.
Especially in social.
So, I guess that would be my advice. And of course, take care of yourself, because that's a challenge I didn't mention, which is burnout. Burnout is real. So that would be my recommendation as well, something to think about.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here, and thank you for accepting to help our women and girls.
Sure, with pleasure. Thank you.